The sound of birds and a lawnmower in the distance was the only thing Daniel Reese heard when he stepped outside that morning. For the first time in years, peace felt possible. The new home was modest single-story brick, old trees lining the driveway, a porch where he could finally breathe. After 2 decades working high-profile cases with the FBI, Daniel wanted simplicity. No more surveillance vans, no more dead drops. Just a quiet life. But taped to his front door was the first sign that quiet wasn't coming. A white sheet, laminated and curling at the corners, fluttered slightly in the breeze. At the top, a bold logo, Sunset Ridge HOA. Beneath it, in firm serif font, "You are in violation of HOA landscaping standards. Failure to remove unauthorized garden structures within 7 days will result in a $250 daily fine." Daniel read it twice, then glanced down at the so-called unauthorized structure, a small wooden trellis over his front walkway. It was hand-built by his late wife before the cancer took her. Nothing fancy, just a humble arch draped with ivy and soft pink roses. His fingers brushed against it as he exhaled. He knew how bureaucracies worked, rules, citations, control. He also knew when something wasn't about rules, but power. Later that morning, Daniel walked down to the HOA office just a few blocks over. Tucked inside the community center, a woman in her 50s sat behind the front desk, aggressively typing. "Karen Milsner available?" he asked. His tone calm, but assertive. The woman looked up. Her smile was thin. "She's in a board session. I'll wait." He took a seat in the lobby. The walls were decorated with posters of community events, pool schedules, and laminated pages listing top Sunset Ridge violations of the month. His name wasn't there. Not yet. After 15 minutes, the conference door opened. Out stepped Karen Milsner, tall, straight posture, perfectly set hair, and a folder clutched to her chest like a legal weapon. She clocked Daniel instantly. "Mr. Reese," she said, with the sort of fake warmth that felt like a business handshake before a firing. "That's right," he said, rising. "Got your letter." Karen glanced at her clipboard. "Yes, your trellis is not within code. All front yard fixtures must be pre-approved by the board." Daniel folded his arms. "You're saying I need permission to grow flowers?" "I'm saying," she replied, now firm, "that Sunset Ridge has standards. We are proud of our visual continuity. If we let one homeowner build what they want, we get clutter, and clutter becomes chaos. It's a wood archway, Karen, not a nightclub." Her eyes tightened. "I hope you understand. This isn't personal." But Daniel had seen that look before in interrogation rooms and hearings. From people who pushed just far enough to stay legal, but always stayed in control. He nodded once. "Copy that." He turned and walked out without another word. But as he stepped onto the sidewalk, he caught her voice behind him low, clipped, into a Bluetooth headset. "He thinks he's clever. Watch, he's gonna resist. Like the last guy, we'll deal with it." That night, Daniel reviewed his security footage. No one had touched the trellis. No anonymous neighbor had filed a complaint. It was her, Karen, targeting him directly. The next morning, another letter arrived, this time citing unauthorized vehicle usage. His SUV standard black. Government issue was apparently unsightly and raised community concerns. Daniel sat on his porch, holding the notice. The sun rose over the pines as neighborhood kids biked past, unaware of the silent war brewing on their street. Behind his calm expression, Daniel's mind began doing what it had trained for: observe, record, and wait. He didn't need revenge. He needed leverage. And Karen, whether she knew it or not, had just become part of an investigation she'd never see coming. By the end of the week, Daniel Reese had received 3 more citations, each more absurd than the last. One accused him of noise violations for playing jazz on his back porch at 7 p.m., volume low enough that even his security cameras barely registered it. Another charged him for unsecured trash bins, even though his containers were latched and stored by code. The final one was the most ridiculous. improper use of government-marked vehicles in a family-oriented residential area. The SUV had no markings, just black paint, tinted windows, and a clean title. Daniel didn't argue. He documented every letter, every timestamp, every conversation filed and backed up. When a person pushes too hard, they leave fingerprints. He just had to wait for Karen to press too far. But it was getting harder to stay silent. He walked out one morning to find his mailbox door ripped off its hinges. No envelope theft, no tire tracks, just a deliberate act of vandalism, subtle enough to be dismissed, but clear enough to send a message. His neighbor across the street, an elderly man named Don, was watering his grass. Daniel approached. "You see anything last night?" Daniel asked. Don hesitated, then nodded toward the cul-de-sac. Saw a couple guys in polo shirts and tactical boots around midnight. Walked the curb like they were casing houses. Thought they might be security. But something felt off. Security hired by who? Don scratched his head. Karen's been talking about starting a volunteer enforcement team, said the HOAS. Underfunded. Claimed it was legal under the charter. Daniel raised an eyebrow. She say that to you directly? At the last meeting. Said the board approved it. But I haven't seen any paperwork. Daniel gave a slight nod. Volunteer enforcement team. The phrase alone reeked of potential abuse. Later that day, Daniel walked to the community mailbox cluster. As he inserted his new outgoing letters, complaints, and reports addressed to the county HOA authority, he spotted a familiar figure coming down the sidewalk. Karen, wearing a pastel pantsuit, oversized sunglasses, and holding her phone like a badge of honor. She stopped when she saw him, smiled wide. "Morning, Mr. Reese. I see you're still refusing to bring your property into compliance." Daniel smiled just as wide. "Morning, Ms. Milsner. I see you're still making up violations. As you go." She didn't flinch. "I'm simply enforcing the guidelines. This neighborhood has a tradition, a reputation, of paranoia and power plays." Karen lowered her glasses slightly. "You know, some people would find it suspicious someone in your profession parking an unmarked vehicle on a quiet street, installing security cameras on every corner. Some might even think you're surveilling neighbors." Daniel didn't bite, but he leaned in, just enough to drop his voice. "I install cameras because of people like you. Because you don't follow the rules, you make them up to push people round." Karen straightened her shoulders, her voice icy. "Let's not escalate this further. You may think your badge makes you untouchable, but this isn't your agency. It's my community." "No, Karen," Daniel said calmly. "It belongs to everyone. And if you're hiding something, I'll find it." She stared at him for a long moment, long enough that the smell dropped. Then she walked away without another word. That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through archived HOA documents, budgets, bylaws, enforcement procedures. A few lines stood out. "The HOA shall not employ or contract private security personnel without majority board vote and full disclosure to community members." There had been no such vote. No community announcement, no visible paperwork, and yet, Karen had allegedly started a security force. He leaned back in his chair, then turned to his side laptop and opened an encrypted folder. Inside, a blank case file titled, HOA Sunset Ridge, Informal Inquiry. Daniel clicked Begin Documentation. The flyer arrived folded in half, slipped under Daniel's front door like a whisper in the night. Plain white, black text, no seal, no signature. Special HOA Community Safety Meeting Tuesday. 6 o'clock from Sunset Ridge Clubhouse. Mandatory attendance. Strongly encouraged. Daniel unfolded it slowly, reading between the lines. This wasn't a meeting, it was a spectacle. Tuesday evening arrived with a sky-tinged gold. The clubhouse was buzzing with small talk, fox smiles, and tight whispers. About 40 homeowners filled the folding chairs lined in precise rows. At the front of the room stood a portable projector, a pulled-down screen, and Karen. She was dressed for war, bright red blazer, pearls, and a voice that dripped artificial concern. "Good evening. Neighbors, thank you for coming on such short notice. Tonight's meeting is about one thing, safety. Daniel stood near the back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He watched as Karen clicked to the first slide. A grainy photo filled the screen. It was his SUV, parked in his own driveway. Some of you have expressed concern, Karen began, about a black, heavily tinted vehicle frequently seen round our neighborhood and marked unfamiliar, and often associated with government surveillance operations. A few heads turned, some faces showed unease, others just looked confused. Karen clicked to the next slide. A blurry frame from his outdoor camera feed cropped and zoomed. It made the front of his house look ominous. Multiple residents have mentioned a pattern of unusual behavior, camera installations, restricted access signs, interactions that feel confrontational. Daniel raised his hand. Where did you get that footage? Karen didn't miss a beat. As president, I'm authorized to accept anonymous submissions in the interest of public safety. Did that submission come from my property? Karen's voice stiffened. We're not here to debate sources, Mr. Reese. We're here to protect families. A soft murmur rippled through the room. Daniel stepped forward, now standing just behind the last row of seats. Calmly, he addressed the group, not loud, not angry, just steady. For those who don't know me, I'm Daniel Reese. I moved here 6 months ago after retiring from 20 years of federal service. That SUV, it's standard government issue. I've done nothing illegal, nor against HOA code, at least not real code. He looked around. Some neighbors avoided his gaze. A few met his eyes, wary but curious. But in the past 2 weeks, I've received 6 violations, none of them valid. I've had my mailbox vandalized, my trash cited for imaginary rules, and now surveillance photos taken from unknown sources. That's not safety. That's harassment. Karen stepped forward, expression tight. Your behavior has raised concern. Daniel, you intimidate people. No, Karen. He replied, you do. Silence fell like a curtain. Daniel let it linger. Before continuing, this community deserves leadership that protects, not polices. You've created an atmosphere of fear, using rules to control instead of to guide. And if you've created an enforcement team without a vote, without board minutes, then you've broken your own charter. Karen's jaw clenched. But before she could respond, someone else stood. A woman near the front. Lisa Carter, mother of 2, lived 3 houses down. I got cited for having sidewalk chalk on my driveway, she said quietly. My kids were drawing dinosaurs. Then another neighbor stood on. The older man with the garden hose. I've lived here 17 years. I've never seen this level of intimidation. More voices joined in. Not angry, just tired. Tired of letters, fines, quiet threats, and Karen's perfectly legal bullying. Karen held up her hands. Let's not lose sight of the issue. This meeting is about safety. No, Daniel said, turning to face the room. This meeting is about power. And we just saw who's using it and who it's being used against. The crowd didn't clap, but the silence that followed was no longer hers. Karen blinked, adjusted her blazer, then shut off the projector. Meeting adjourned. But as people trickled out, a new energy hung in the air, something subtle but seismic. Karen had fired her shot. Now the neighborhood was watching both of them. The next morning, Daniel awoke to footsteps crunching gravel outside his window. He slipped out of bed, pulled the blinds, and spotted 2 men standing on his front lawn. Both wore navy blue polos with the Sunset Ridge logo embroidered over the chest. On their sleeves were sewn-on patches that read, Community Enforcement Division. Military-style boots, clipboards. One carried a body cam. The other wore a holstered radio. They weren't police, but they were dressed to look like it. Daniel stepped onto the porch and let the screen door close hard behind him. Can I help you? The shorter one, mid-30s with a buzz cut, looked up from his clipboard. Mr. Reese, we're conducting a compliance check on behalf of the HOA. We've received complaints about surveillance equipment facing neighboring homes. Daniel narrowed his eyes. You mean my home's security system? We're just here to inspect for policy violations. You're trespassing. The taller one leaned maybe early 40s, stepped forward and lifted a laminated badge. The font was unprofessional. The photo blurry. It read, Sunset Ridge Enforcement Authority. Deputy 042. Daniel studied it. That badge is not issued by law enforcement. We're authorized by HOA charter to conduct inspections. No, you're not. There was a tense pause. Then, the tall one said flatly, Sir, if you don't comply, we'll be forced to place you under neighborhood arrest until the board can review. Daniel let out a quiet, incredulous laugh, then turned and walked inside without another word. Seconds later, he returned holding a black leather wallet and flipped it open with a practiced motion. Daniel Reese. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The fake enforcers froze. You're both impersonating law enforcement, he said, voice like stone. That's a federal offense. That badge you just showed me, that's fraud. We're not claiming to be cops. The shirt one stammered. We're HOA appointed. Appointed doesn't mean empowered. Daniel reached for his phone. You have 10 seconds to walk off my property before I call the real police. I've got full footage on my cameras. And trust me, I've filed on smaller things. The two men backed off quickly, muttering to each other. As they reached the sidewalk, a voice called out from a parked golf cart at the corner. Don't listen to him. He's trying to undermine the community. Karen, sitting straight, sunglasses perched high, phone in hand like a general behind enemy lines. Daniel walked down the path to the edge of his lawn. Karen, those two men just impersonated public officials on your orders. She shrugged, voice syrupy sweet. They're volunteers. We're entitled to maintain community standards. You refused to comply. We took appropriate action. You took illegal action. Well, she said, shifting in her seat, I guess. We'll let the board decide. No, Karen. We'll let the law decide. That evening, Daniel emailed the footage directly to a local police contact. He didn't invoke the bureau, not yet, but he used all the right language. Unlawful impersonation, harassment, repeated trespass. He knew how to write reports that moved fast. By morning, both fake officers were visited by real ones. Their badges were confiscated. One of them worked maintenance at a property 2 blocks away. The other was Karen's nephew. Later that week, Daniel received an unsigned notice taped to his garage. Snitchies don't belong here. He tore it down, scanned it, and added it to the case file. Meanwhile, the neighborhood buzzed. Conversations quieted when Daniel walked by, but not out of fear, out of curiosity. Whispers spread fast about the confrontation, the fake officers, the badge, the mention of FBI. Some neighbors began to ask quiet questions. Lisa from 3 doors down left a note on his porch. You're not alone. Karen's been doing this for years. Most people just leave. We've been too scared to speak. Daniel folded the note and placed it into a manila folder labeled witness willing to testify. The war wasn't just his anymore. It had begun as a personal conflict. Now it was becoming something bigger. The HOA board met every second Thursday at 7 p.m. in the smaller conference room behind the Sunset Ridge Clubhouse. It was a poorly lit, beige-carpeted space with plastic chairs and a broken Keurig in the corner. Daniel had never attended one until now. He arrived early, took a seat in the back, and watched as the usual faces filtered in. Karen came last, carrying a branded binder and smiling like she owned the air. She didn't acknowledge Daniel, but her shoulders tensed ever so slightly when she saw him sitting there calm, still. Waiting, the meeting began with Karen's standard greeting and a rundown of community concerns. A few parents brought up playground maintenance. One man asked about pool repairs. Then came the agenda item that Daniel had been waiting for. Security discussion, Karen announced. As many of you are aware, Sunset Ridge has initiated a neighborhood enforcement program to help ensure community compliance. 2 members have volunteered to serve as compliance officers. She gestured vaguely to an empty seat where the now disgraced officers should have been. Daniel raised his hand. Point of order, he said. Has the board voted to approve this program? Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. As HOA president, I'm authorized to implement safety measures under Section 4.3 of the bylaws. Daniel held up a printed copy. Section 4.3 refers to emergency safety provisions for natural disasters or criminal activity, not for creating a private security force. A board member, Lena Cruz, a real estate agent who usually stayed quiet, cleared her throat. Karen, did we actually vote on this? I don't remember seeing a motion. Karen hesitated just long enough for the silence to stretch. It was discussed in an executive subcommittee, she said quickly. Subcommittees can't approve enforcement actions, Daniel countered. They can only advise. He stood, holding up a second document. This is a cease and desist order filed with the county HOA regulatory body. It includes evidence of impersonation, unlawful citations, and property harassment, all conducted by persons acting under your authority. Karen's face paled. You're not a board member, she snapped. You don't have standing to speak. I'm a homeowner. I've got standing to sue. That caught the room. Neighbors shifted. Whispers stirred. Two board members exchanged wide-eyed glances. Lena leaned forward. Karen, this isn't how we're supposed to do things. We need transparency. We should have voted. Karen's voice cracked slightly now. He's turning this into a spectacle. He's manipulating the board. I'm holding you accountable, Daniel said. Calmly. He turned toward the board. This isn't about flower beds or trash cans. This is about someone abusing their position to target people who don't obey her. There was again that shift in the room. Something was changing. Daniel handed over a USB drive. This contains video of the two men who attempted to arrest me. Neither are law enforcement. One is Karen's nephew, the other works in maintenance. Both were acting under her direction. Karen stood, red-faced, gripping her binder. You're out of line. Daniel didn't flinch. And you're out of power. The meeting erupted into crosstalk. Neighbors who had never spoken began sharing their own stories, cited for garden gnomes, written up for the color of their mulch, fined for leaving recycling bins out to minutes past collection. Karen tried to shout over them, but it was too late. The board voted, on the spot, to suspend all current enforcement actions and launch a formal investigation into Karen's conduct. Lena was appointed interim president while the county reviewed Daniel's documentation. Karen stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots on the tile. Daniel didn't celebrate. He just gathered his documents and walked out into the cool night air. But halfway to his driveway, he noticed something strange. A spray-painted phrase scrawled across his sidewalk, Mull, and underneath it, in smaller letters, we know what you are. He crouched down and snapped a photo. It wasn't just vandalism. It was a warning. Karen may have been down. She wasn't out. Not yet. It was just after 8 a.m. when Daniel opened his blinds and noticed the neon orange flag markers scattered along his backyard fence line. At first, he assumed they were for utility work, but when he stepped outside, a man in a safety vest raised a hand and shouted over the hum of a handheld GPS device, "Morning. Here for a property boundary assessment, ordered by the HOA." Daniel frowned. He hadn't received any notice, and by all legal standards, no one could initiate a land survey on private property without consent unless a legal dispute had been filed. He stepped closer. Who authorized this? The surveyor pulled a clipboard from his truck. Says here, Karen Milsner, Sunset Ridge HOA. They claim your fence may be encroaching onto common land. Daniel scanned the paper. It wasn't a court order, just an internal HOA request. You're aware this is private property, right? I was told the HOA owned this strip along the fence. Daniel's tone dropped. They don't. And I've got the title deed to prove it. The man hesitated. Look, I'm just doing the job. You want me to stop? Daniel nodded. For now, I'll pay for an independent survey, one that's legal. Later that day, Daniel drove to the county assessor's office and pulled the original land survey from the public archive. His fence line, exactly within bounds. No encroachment, no violations. It was a setup. When Daniel returned home, he checked his camera footage from the night before. Just after midnight, two figures hooded, gloved appeared on the edge of the property. One of them yanked a survey marker out any of the ground and hammered it in 5 feet deeper into Daniel's yard. They were trying to fake the boundary. Daniel slowed the footage and froze the screen. One of the men paused under the floodlight just long enough to reveal his face. Karen's nephew, the same guy who wore the fake compliance enforcement badge 2 weeks ago. Daniel forwarded the video to his county contact and added it to his growing evidence file. This wasn't HOA enforcement anymore. This was trespass, tampering, and conspiracy. That night, Daniel installed more motion-activated lights. He adjusted the cameras for infrared night vision, and he quietly mailed certified letters to the County Land Commission and HOA Oversight Office, requesting a formal audit of Sunset Ridge's legal authority. 3 days later, another letter arrived, this one typed in bold, legalistic font. Notice of mandatory fence removal. HOA order #77 for B failure to remove unauthorized fencing within 48 hours will result in HOA action and contractor info. Cement? Daniel stared at it, stunned. Contractor enforcement? That wasn't even a legal term. It sounded like something Karen made up in a rush of spite. He drove straight to the newly appointed HOA interim president, Lena Cruz. Her eyes widened when he showed her the letter. We didn't vote on this. I haven't seen this order. Karen's still acting behind the board. She was stripped of her power. She's not accepting that. Lena looked genuinely rattled. She's working with someone. She couldn't be doing this alone. She's desperate. Desperation makes people stupid. Or dangerous. That evening, as Daniel pulled into his driveway, he noticed a large black pickup truck idling 2 houses down, tinted windows, and marked plates. Same truck that had parked outside the clubhouse 2 nights before. It pulled away as he approached. Inside his house, an envelope set taped to the door. No postage, no name. Just 3 words scrawled on the front in red marker. Back, OFF. Now Daniel opened it with gloved hands. Inside, a printed satellite photo of his property, zoomed in on his back patio. He didn't react, just folded the paper, scanned it, and added it to the file. By now, it was clear this was no longer about petty fines or trellis disputes. Karen had crossed into criminal territory, organized, documented, and deliberate, but she had miscalculated. One thing, Daniel wasn't just a homeowner. He was a trained federal investigator, and she had just made herself the prime subject in a case she couldn't silence. Daniel wasn't sleeping much. By now, the evidence folder on his desk was thick photos, video stills, anonymous letters, vandalism reports, forged violations. All of it pointed in one direction. Karen Milsner was desperate, but the scale of her obsession didn't line up with personal pride anymore. It was something bigger, something beyond HOA authority. And then, the break came. A knock at Daniel's door around 9:15 p.m. Timid, unsure, he checked the camera first. It was Frank Delaney, a former HOA board member who had resigned the previous year after a very public disagreement with Karen. Daniel opened the door cautiously. I don't want trouble, Frank said quickly, eyes darting behind him. But I heard what happened, and I think I can help you. They sat in Daniel's kitchen, blinds pulled tight. Frank's hands trembled as he slid a small thumb drive across the table. I kept some emails. I thought if I ever needed to protect myself, I'd have them. But this has gone too far. You need to see them. Daniel plugged the drive into his laptop. What he saw made his blood run cold. The emails stretched back 18 months, conversations between Karen and a private development firm, Bryson Ventures, LLC. The company specialized in owning residential neighborhoods for short-term rental investments, vacation homes, urban conversions. The scheme was simple. Karen would identify key properties near the lake and walking trails, homes with high market potential. Then she'd use HOA code violations and aggressive enforcement to push the homeowners out. Once the property was sold under pressure, Bryson Ventures would buy it cheap, convert it, and kick back a percentage of profits to Karen's consulting firm. Daniel's house was at the top of the list. She tried it with 3 other families. Frank whispered, One left after a year of violations. Another sold to a fake buyer who flipped the house immediately. The third fought back, but got burned out. Literally, there was a fire electrical, they said. Daniel stared at the screen. He'd seen this kind of operation before, just not in a suburban HOA. But the playbook was familiar. Isolate, intimidate, pressure, profit. Why are you coming forward now? Frank swallowed hard. Because my daughter wants to move back here. And I realized, if I don't stop this, she might be next. Daniel copied the entire folder, emails, attachments, digital, signatures. He cross-referenced Bryson Ventures and found that Karen's name appeared on a Shell LLC registered to towns over. Milsner Advisory Group. The dots connected to cleanly. He sent everything to the County Housing Authority, the state real estate fraud unit, and his contact at the FBI field office, not as a formal case, but as a confidential referral with supporting evidence. Then, he drafted an email to the Sunset Ridge homeowners. Dear neighbors, you've seen the signs, the harassment, the threats, the silence. It's time you saw the reason why. Attached were redacted emails from Karen's correspondence, proof of her connection to Bryson Ventures, and documentation of the fraudulent citations issued to several residents, including himself. He hit send. Within 10 minutes, his phone lit up with notifications. Replies poured in, some in shock, others with gratitude. One was from Lisa Carter. I knew it. She tried to buy our house through some random investor last year when we got sick of the fines. Then another from Dawn. She had a guy come by last month asking if I was ready to sell. Same company name on the card, Bryson Ventures. By morning, the entire neighborhood was on fire. Figuratively, Karen tried to respond through official HOA channels, but the board voted unanimously to block her from using the community email list. She drove around in her golf cart, stopping in front of homes like a ghost of control past. But no one waved. No one answered her doorbell. And then came the knock at Daniel's door, this time from a uniformed county investigator. Clipboard in hand. We'd like to formally interview you. Your report triggered a multi-agency probe. There's already a fraud complaint filed against her LLC. Daniel stepped back and nodded. Let's talk. The walls Karen had built with fear were cracking. And Daniel wasn't the only one pushing. Now, the whole neighborhood had found its voice. And Karen, she was about to lose everything. By the end of the week, Karen Milsner's world was unraveling. It began quietly. An unmarked sedan parked across from her home. Two plainclothes investigators stepped out, knocking on her door while neighbors peeked through blinds and whispered over fences. Karen didn't answer. But the next morning, her face turned up in local news. HOA president under investigation for fraud, property scheme. Sunset Ridge had never seen headlines like that before. The county issued an immediate injunction halting all active HOA enforcement under Karen's leadership. The developer, Bryson Ventures LLC, was named in a formal real estate fraud complaint, with subpoenas issued for financial records, emails, and contracts. The once pristine community board was now a storm of reckoning. Daniel watched it all unfold with quiet resolve. But he wasn't gloating, he was still cautious. People like Karen didn't just vanish. They fought, clung, twisted narratives until the last breath of authority left them. Sure enough, just 2 days after the story broke, Karen called for an emergency public statement outside the clubhouse. Only about 10 people showed up. She stood at the top of the clubhouse steps, holding a prepared speech with trembling hands. Her voice was thinner now, less commanding, more defensive. This is all a misunderstanding. A political attack by someone who doesn't understand community management. I've given years of my life to this neighborhood. Daniel stood at the back of the small crowd, arms folded. He didn't need to say a word. One by one, neighbors began walking away. Some shook their heads, others refused to meet her eyes. Her voice cracked as she tried to continue. But the damage was done. By the following Monday, Karen submitted her resignation. The board accepted it unanimously. That same afternoon, the new interim president, Lena Cruz, stood outside the clubhouse. and made a short but powerful statement. Sunset Ridge will no longer be run through fear or favoritism. We are moving forward with transparency, accountability, and community-first values. The applause was real, earnest, small, but honest. Over the next month, Daniel saw change ripple across the neighborhood. Citations were reviewed and many were thrown out. The Security Enforcement Division was dissolved and banned from ever reforming. Policies were rewritten, and a third-party legal team audited every decision Karen had made in her final 2 years. More than a dozen families submitted complaints that aligned with Daniel's findings. Several were planning civil suits. But perhaps the biggest shift was in the people themselves. Neighbors who once kept to themselves now knocked on each other's doors. Block parties, forgotten for years, returned. Kids played freely again. Chalk art lining driveways without fear of fines. One Saturday afternoon, as Daniel watered his front lawn, Lisa Carter and her 2 kids walked over with lemonade and homemade cookies. "You didn't just stop her," Lisa said, smiling. "You reminded us we didn't have to be afraid." Daniel gave a soft nod. He didn't need recognition, but the piece that meant something. 2 weeks later, a large moving truck pulled up to Karen's home. No farewell party, no waves goodbye, just a woman defeated by her own arrogance, forced to leave the very neighborhood she once ruled. Daniel stood on his porch, sipping coffee as the last box was hauled away. The truck pulled off, and with it, the last shadow of her control. The neighborhood was quiet again, not the silence of fear, but of healing. And as Daniel turned to head back inside, he paused, glancing once more at the garden trellis his wife had built years ago. The one Karen had tried to tear down, still standing, still blooming.